Welcome to Break Everything. Your host, Lisa L. Levy, will guide you through critical thought conversations and a journey of directed disruption that makes a difference. Experience bold conversations with industry leaders who are willing to challenge the status quo.
Welcome to our second panel conversation in the Break Everything podcast series. The podcast was designed to bring in subject matter experts, disruptors in the healthcare space, people who are willing to think differently and challenge the status quo. From those conversations, we introduced and asked the question, if I gave you a magic wand, what one thing would you change for healthcare as a whole? Each of my guests has had fascinating answers to the question, but there have been themes that have been pretty consistent. And the themes that are most impactful to me are the ones that aren't relying on a technological advancement, but they're simple things that we can start building on day in and day out. To continue one of those conversations, I've invited a couple of guests back to explore the topic of how do we start making meaningful information available to consumers or patients so that we can start to take on our preventative care and be ahead of the curve rather than constantly responding. I'd like to introduce and bring back to the conversation Bob Maguire and Michael Hund. Thank you both for joining me again.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. Good to be back.
It's great to see you both. I'd like to start briefly, and Bob, if you would just refresh our audience on who you are and what you do.
So I am Bob Maguire, President, CEO, and Co-founder of BioLab Sciences here in Scottsdale, Arizona. We are a biotech company focused on using the patient's own cells to help improve their quality of life. We're growing rapidly. April will be our 5-year anniversary, and we love helping people.
Bob, thank you for that. And Michael, will you refresh the audience on who you are and what you're doing?
My name is Michael Hund. I'm CEO of EB Research Partnership, and we have one big, bold, audacious goal, which is to cure Epidermolysis Bullosa, which is a rare and life-threatening genetic skin disease by the end of this decade, by 2030. We were founded by a group of parents along with Jill and Eddie Vedder. And, the way in which we pursue that mission is funding the most innovative research and science on the planet, all under a venture philanthropy model, what does that mean? That means when we raise dollars from the community, we fund the best science and we vet that with the scientific advisory board. But when we fund that science, we behave almost like a benevolent venture capitalist when build in equity and upside. So if there's a commercialization or return, those returns go right back to the foundation to fund more research until we cure the disease.
And that is such a disruptive model in the space to actually generate money and bring it forward. And Bob, what you're doing with BioLab Sciences and the products that you're bringing to market and continuing to bring new solutions to your patients, absolutely groundbreaking work. I appreciate both of you gentlemen so much, and thanks for joining in the thought exercise today. One of the things, Bob, in your patient community, wound care is a huge part of what you're solving for with your products. In that, when we were talking initially in the magic wand moment, you suggested that if people understood nutrition better, that we would have an opportunity to circumvent illnesses that are so prevalent today. I'd like to start with that thread and see what in your perspective, where do we start? How do we start building a better tomorrow with education?
Well, I think educating people on what a healthy diet looks like. I think in the United States, sugar and corn syrup have overrun food in the sense that, we all want it to taste good. We go out to restaurants, it's the land of the big food where they give you all this food. And if you look at other parts of the world, they don't have the obesity and diabetes and other issues that we have. And I think those lead systemically to other issues down the road that end up costing a lot of money. So the information up front, starting at a very young age, is how do we teach people to provide nutrition to themselves in a way that will extend their life, but also give them a better quality of life without running into cardiovascular issues, diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and you can go on and on.
Michael, in the work that you do with the venture philanthropy and the investment into new options, the opportunity to start with education is very real. I know it's not an EB answer, but for the broader spectrum that you're playing in, this was a topic that was interesting to you as well.
Absolutely. And look, we've learned a lot from our model, right? When we started, there was 2 clinical trials, little hope, not a lot of progress happening globally. Today, there's almost 35 clinical trials, more than half of which we've funded directly. We've got 4 phase 3 clinical trials for the first time ever. The first treatment approval for EB is up in February of next year. So there's been tremendous progress, but remember, EB is one of 7,000 rare diseases, and I think it's important to understand the stats, understand the market. There's 400 million people on this planet with a rare disease. That's more people than cancer and HIV combined. Half of them are children. 3 out of 10 of those children with a rare disease, won't see their 5th birthday. And, on average, it takes 6 to 8 years for rare diseases to be diagnosed, right? So I think a big part of it, and Bob said this, is right, education and access to the right information. We see that as multifaceted. Number one, to your point about venture philanthropy, we figured out a model that works for us and this rare disease. And rare disease is uniquely positioned to be successful with venture philanthropy models, because in aggregate, yes, 400 million people, but individually, EB is 20 to 30,000 people in the United States. Some rare diseases are 1 or 2 patients, right? So, alone, these diseases are small. They try to educate themselves on the best business models, the best practices, what companies are working in the space that can help them. So we've always tried to take a position of education that, yes, we're focused on EB, we're focused on a cure by 2030, but in the process, if we're going to pioneer a model for advancing treatments, eventually achieving a cure, how can we teach other rare disease foundations? The rising tide lifts all ships, right? So as we learn, as we prove impact and success, how can we teach other rare disease organizations that model? And, the other thing I'll say when it comes to education, very similar to Bob's points about nutrition, that access to information. I mean, think about that, 6 to 8 years sometimes to get an accurate diagnosis if you have a rare disease. EB, pretty soon, once the child is born, that they have this life-threatening genetic skin disease. But how can we leverage technology? How can we leverage experts? How can we leverage a parent to a parent, right? A parent that's been bandaging their child a certain way for 5 years, connecting them with a parent that just had a newly diagnosed child. So education, whether it be the business model and how we can really leverage our business model to help other rare disease foundations, all the way to curating and helping, parents navigate, which is an incredibly difficult journey with a rare disease.
So Michael, in there, you were talking about leveraging technology, right? We all have devices, and mine is out of arm's reach so that it doesn't buzz while we're talking, right? But we all have our devices that we live with and we can't live without. The technology to share information exists, but there's no priority placed on aggregating that information and making it easy. Nutrition, we're looking at the 3 of us, we've all had different experiences in our early primary education, but the pyramid, the nutritional pyramid, what it exists today, how it isn't the education system's responsibility to teach nutrition, right? But how do we leverage the need to get this information out in a consumable way so that young people understand that corn syrup is bad, and that parents who are raising children on fixed incomes understand that protein, vegetables, fruit, those are the things that actually provide the nutrients to building blocks for growth and development. If you had the magic wand, where would you start? How would you engage the information and get it in the hands of people who need it?
That was for you, Michael.
Oh, that's for me. Sorry, I was deferring to Bob. Well, no, look, it's a great question. And I think what's fascinating, Lisa, you bring together disruptors. We're on the topic of healthcare, but now we're also on the topic of education. And in my view, healthcare and education have been the last frontiers fully disrupted by technology, right? And there's good reasons for that, right? There's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of compliance. There's a lot of regulation, and for the most part, those are there for really good reasons. And I think that stifled some innovation. So what's the happy medium, right? That we can start to achieve. So, a few years ago, we asked ourselves the magic wand question, Lisa, your question. How can we put speed and acceleration from the bench to the bedside of advancing, treatments and science in a lab into the hands of patients? And to do so, we got the key stakeholders in a room. We got biotech and pharmaceutical companies, representatives of the patient community, clinicians, bioinformaticians, researchers, and technology companies, right? And we asked that big magic wand question. And what we walked out of that room saying, exactly as you said, Lisa, let's look at other areas where technology permeates our lives, right? What if navigating your journey with a rare disease was as easy as putting a destination into your GPS and being guided for the left and right turns, right? But for us, the left and right turns are the right treatment, the right time for the right patient and the right hospital, right? How can we leverage technology to start to do that? So that was our big, magic wand question. Easy to say, not as easy to do. But a few years later, we've built a technology platform, right, where a patient can register and be provided with at-home genomic testing, right? And they work with, Stanford School of Medicine as the lead to give them genomic counseling, understand their genetics. The patient answers brief patient-reported outcome surveys, and the patient has agency, power to the patient. The patient's in the driver's seat, and they can choose, when and who and how they want to share that information, whether they want to share it with the research community, whether they want to share it with other, patients or family members, where they want to share it with biotech and pharmaceutical companies working on clinical trials that can help their disease. And via that process, they're connected with a web of resources, which all these apps on our phone do, just, arguably not successfully enough for healthcare. They can be connected with, clinical trials that best map their genomics and their preferences, the best clinicians within 50 to 100 miles of them that specialize in their type of rare disease, other patients and families, right, that have a unique shared experience with them. Because sometimes the patients and the families, particularly in a disease like EB that is incredibly challenging, hours of bandage changing, bleach baths, doctor's appointments around the clock, what can parents and patients learn from one another? What resources? Bob mentioned this on resources and education. You mentioned, Lisa, these are things that sometimes aren't taught in our primary education, right? How can we get resources on how to bandage, how to treat your wounds, how to evaluate participation in a clinical trial? So, that was our big magic wand, leveraging technology to make navigating your journey with a rare disease as easy as entering a destination into your GPS.
And in that journey, right, enter any chronic condition, right? It can be anything, diabetes, obesity, whatever. Having that guided patient journey in an app is hugely impactful. Bob, when you took your role with BioLab Sciences, you had no background in the industry of healthcare in any way, shape, or form. And I remember you telling a story about basically choosing to ask for forgiveness rather than permission as you were navigating learning the system. Will you talk to us a little bit about the success that you had in just trying to do the right thing for the right reasons?
Sure. So for me, it's all about helping people. And I had a rollover car accident in 2013. It was life-changing. I didn't have a scratch on me. And I asked myself the proverbial question the next day: am I doing anything to improve people's lives? Am I helping people? The answer was no. Headed down the path of regenerative medicine and learned that, to me, helping people is a passion that I've always had, that I was finally able to do. The thing probably that's made it the hardest is the regulatory, the reimbursement, the billing, all that fun stuff. I think information is power. I think the more people know, the better. I think that at the end of the day, many doctors enter medical school to help people, but end up being a business and making money. And for them, they're focused more on the cure of what they do than the prevention. The prevention is more time consuming. The cure is more catastrophic and cost affecting. And I think that as a society, if we can get away from the big companies out there that make tons of money, and when you walk in the supermarket selling the sugar cereals and the cheeses and the this and the that and the things that people eat, I think over time you will see a decrease in diabetes, heart disease, cholesterol, high blood pressure, the things that lead to chronic illness that shorten people's lives.
And in that, the old wives' tale, actually, I guess it's a cliche, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, or more than a pound of cure. We have a challenge with chronic disease in this country, where from the pharmaceutical perspective, cure isn't really the goal because cure no longer generates revenue. That continuing to treat over time cancer, as an example, is more interesting to the pharmaceutical companies than actual curative outcomes. Totally a different thing, Michael, for what you're trying to do with EB, where the cure is the goal and it's the only option that's relevant because it has to be, because it's life and death. But in this model, right, where we're starting to consider technology to create what I heard, developing in that is community, right? Where we have people with like experiences going on similar journeys, sharing knowledge, sharing information, improving that patient experience through knowledge, right? With that, we really are tap dancing around the impact that prevention has and how that financially is not in the best interest of the companies that are driving the industry. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, Lisa, I knew I liked you already. Your podcast is called Break Everything, but now I know I like Bob, from a life-changing moment to commit to doing things differently. I come from 6 generations of cattle ranchers in Kansas, so we're cowboys, right? And we do what it takes to get the job done. And the way I grew up was community. And the only way that you can succeed being a rancher, being a farmer, is depending on your community and your people around you. And look, it's about time. Time is the greatest asset that we have, right? It's finite, right? It's precious, it's delicate. And, whether it be saving time and adding years back to people's lives by prevention and nutrition, or an EB, of course the cure is the goal. But, that is the end of the book. There are many chapters along the way. Right now, we don't have a single approved treatment for EB. And in fact, of those 400 million people with a rare disease, 95% don't have a treatment. That's a big market problem. So I think success is incremental. Victories need to be celebrated as part of the community, as you said. So for us, look, again, the first treatment up for approval in February is a topical gene therapy, right? That can be life-saving to so many patients today. That's a win, right? And so we have to celebrate that along the way. We have to, educate the community. And what does community mean in this space? I mean, you really do want to put acceleration and speed towards approved treatments, towards delivering healing to patients with EB. And you really can't do that unless you get everybody together, right? People may want the same goal, but they may have different roads, whether you're a biotech or pharmaceutical company, whether you're a patient or family, whether you're a clinician. So trying to align incentives in healthcare for me has always been the road and the path that we should pursue to achieve the outcomes that we want, right? And that has a lot to do with your question about community, but also motivation, right? Those groups are motivated by different things, but if you build good models that can align the incentives of those stakeholders, then I think we can achieve real progress and real wins. So what does that mean for us? We serve the patient community. They are stakeholders, they are patients. We are a rare disease nonprofit foundation, but I believed for a long time, 501c3 is a tax status. That's not a business model. Every patient that battles and fights this disease deserves to have an organization with a really good business model. So we work with the patient community. We work with the scientific and medical community. We identify the best science and research. But when we fund that, again, we call ourselves benevolent venture capitalists, right? just because we're a foundation doesn't mean we should write a check and hope for the best. We should have an economic upside and participation, right? Now, how does that align incentives? Number one, we represent the patient. So we're funding that. We're raising dollars for that. If it succeeds, goal number one is get it in the hands of patients as quickly as possible. Goal number two is we generate a financial return to put back in the foundation, identify the next best innovative research on the planet, and continue to fund it. Well, that's aligned with the incentives of the biotech and pharmaceutical companies. Rare diseases aren't big markets, right? So if you can be a source of capital, almost at an angel level or an early investor to help elevate these things out of academia into a commercial setting, you're bridging the gap of what we call that valley of death. How do you get things in a lab into a commercial setting? We play that role. So that's aligning incentives between academics and biotech and pharmaceutical companies, so we can get it, we can de-risk it and get to that place where now there's commercial interest and those companies can move it forward. So that's just one example to your question about community. For me, I really think about it of aligning incentives. And in any industry, there's always ways to figure out the incentives that can be aligned to achieve mutual progress.
And Bob, you represent some of those products that we're bringing to market to help with, again, it's wound care. And when you started with the first product, you had obstacles to getting it to the patients. And I know that you were diligently trying to expedite time to market, for lack of a better phrase. And I apologize if I just minimized what you did. But if you would tell us, right, how you started going through the process to get your products in the hands of the patients who need them, because it wasn't necessarily the typical path.
No, so we going through distributors that had relationships with the physicians that used the product. They would get the product into the hands of the physicians to use them on the patients. The doctors knew what the products did and how they worked and how they improved the quality of life for the patient. So the goal was to cast a wide net over the United States, which we did. And over 60,000 patients have been treated with our amniotic fluid flow, which we've since pulled off the market because we have to get regulatory approval on amniotic fluid that's been on the market since 1909. And now the FDA wants to know what it is 113 years later. And then we have wound care products, My Own Skin, Dermostat, which have helped patients that had chronic non-healing wounds. Again, the doctors used them. We had to get reimbursement for the products because doctors said you could have the best product, but if they're not reimbursable, no one's going to use them. So we get that there's a financial benefit to the physician who uses it and applies it to the patient. We see a lot of patients with chronic non-healing wounds. And Lisa, every time I look and I'm like, oh my God, only if they knew this when they were younger, only if they treated their body better, even, if they ate better, if they didn't consume as much alcohol, if they didn't eat as much fast food, just little things like that make a big difference in life expectancy, just extending someone's life by 5 years. It's not that hard to do. But sometimes you look at people and you think they're trying to kill themselves.
And unfortunately, while their behavior may show that, it's probably just a lack of knowledge, right? It's an ignorance of actually understanding how they're poisoning themselves. With the products and trying to get them through reimbursement and getting them into the CMS bureaucracy, will you talk to us a little bit about that process? Because I know that was painful.
So we went down the path of getting reimbursement codes for our fluid products, our membrane products, and our My Own Skin Dermostat products. We had to apply with Center for Medicare Medicaid Services. We also, once we did that, I had to go and present in Bethesda, Maryland, or Baltimore at the headquarters of CMS. They finally approved to assign us our own reimbursement codes. So in 2019, October 1st, 2019, the codes went live. But at that point, the codes are what I call empty because no one is familiar with them. The payers don't know them. They have to go through the whole process with the payers of being approved. So they'll reimburse for it. And, these are products that help patients. And it goes back to money. I mean, everything is tied to money from the nutrition to the information getting out to people, to not wanting people to have information, to doctors that treat patients and want to make sure they're getting reimbursed and there's money in it for them. But it was quite a lot of work. And now we have new products come to market that we're going down the path of regulatory approval. And with those, we'll have to resubmit with CMS to get reimbursement codes. So it's not easy trying to help people. You almost feel like they're doing everything they can to block you, but we're doing everything we can to try to help as much as we can.
So in this, right, as I'm synthesizing the threads, I'm going to try and weave a piece of fabric for us, right? If we have technology that we're leveraging with the app that gives us a patient journey that starts to build a community where people who are going through like experiences can gather, and they can gather to get information, share information, and learn about emerging treatments. The idea of a new product or coming to market with a new CMS code, right? And that it is available now, having that type of information in the hands of people who need it. All physicians are never going to have all of the information, right? But if we have pockets of brilliance, if we have these communities together, we're centralizing data, and we can exponentially lift the experience that patients go through because they have the advantage of the collective whole sharing that information. And in the rare disease space, Michael, I know that those numbers of people are smaller, but the idea of having that collection and that collective, I think, would be fantastic.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And it all starts with the data. And we all know the healthcare model and what works and what needs improvement. But certainly data being siloed has been a long problem in the healthcare industry, right? And that is not any one person or institution's fault. That's the way the system is, right? Everybody's incentivized to publish and get the next grant. But I think the fundamental revolutionary transformational shift is putting the power in the hands of the patient, right? And this is something that we've learned, and I learned from mistakes, right? Of trying to go the route to build consensus with many academic medical centers to aggregate on a large data platform. And that took a lot of time. You know, EB is a life-threatening disease. Some kids with the most severe forms don't even make it to their first birthday. Life expectancy is 1 to 30 years old. You know, we don't have time to wait on slow processes and red tape and bureaucracy. And what we learned through going through that process is who's incredibly motivated. You know, I'd argue many are. You know, I think biotech and pharma is motivated. Clinicians are motivated. Researchers, bioinformaticians, they're all motivated. But the families that live this every single day are the most motivated people that you'll ever meet to find answers, to find treatments, to advance progress. So through this process, we realize, how can we make this faster? Well, if you go directly to the patient, things can move really quick, but you need to build models where the patients have the agency to drive things like technology, right? And be the user of this technology, but you have that validated by academic medical centers. So one thing that we did early on is said, yeah, you know, this is really led by patients. We can look to companies like 23andMe and Amazon, you know, that have made really good consumer models. It's all behavioral science, right? Yeah. How can we make the decisions and the engagement very simple and easy to use? So we said, look, is there a way that we can mail genetic testing kits to patients' homes in the comfort of their home, which overcomes some barriers that you mentioned, Lisa, regardless of social determinants of health, location, your ability to get to a major academic medical center, we will bring this to your home, right? We've seen that again in almost every other vertical, but that's been slow in healthcare. But we have that overseen by Stanford University, right? So you've got an IRB, an institutional review board that is really saying, you know, look, these are the rules, these are the regulations, this is the compliance. So I think to build really good models, you start with who's the most motivated with patients, and then you evolve and find synergies amongst those communities. Then you expand that to, you know, engagement and participation with academic medical center. And, what's the value for a biotech or pharmaceutical company, in industry, as Bob said, or regulators, right? Access to that information in real time. Data drives decisions, and the groups that have the most cohesive, unified data sets will not only draw industry interest, that's information that can be useful to go all the things that Bob just said, FDA approvals, CMS, drug pricing, reimbursement. If you've got really good data, you can show baseline data, you can show outcome data, right? So it starts to help there and incentivize biotech and pharma to come in the space. It incentivizes postdocs and PhDs and researchers. If there's two rare diseases, one's got a really good cohesive data set and one, where that doesn't exist, you're going to incentivize researchers and academics and intelligence. So you're exactly right. It is really thinking about data models, but data models that can be shared across the stakeholders in healthcare.
I'd like to add, I think information is most definitely key. An analogy I heard with physicians is when they graduate from medical school, the analogy is they buy one set of golf clubs that they play the rest of their career with. And because of that, they're not always open to new technologies and newer things, which isn't good for the patient, but it's something they're familiar with. I think the importance of the patient being knowledgeable, being engaged, wanting to learn as much as they can, but the key is having the information available for them to know what is available, what they can do, and look for hospitals or facilities or outpatient centers that can treat them with the latest technologies that work. And I think that information is the most important thing, and the patient taking control of their own health is probably the most important thing anyone can do for themselves.
Absolutely. So as we've explored, and I have explored in other conversations, getting it to patient-centric experience is really key. In this, the idea of having meaningful information available, call it in the app on a device where we have communities of people leveraging and growing, is a really good first step. It's only a first step, getting the clinicians and everybody else to be a part of that journey, to share and work with the data so that we are maturing and evolving and growing is critical. But that first step is that point of community where we have one topic and a like group of people who are empowered with the data and tied to the cause. And that's where we begin. And that's what these conversations are all about, gentlemen, is coming up with what is that first step. And I appreciate both of you sharing in this thought exercise and looking at how we use information, how we take that to the patients and make it more meaningful so that we can have more control over treatment and outcomes and drive better results and outcomes in the future. And knowledge remains power and is a really good place for us to start. Thank you both for joining me today. I appreciate your time in the conversation. That's another edition of Break Everything in Healthcare. We'll see you next time.
You have just experienced Break Everything with Lisa L. Levy. Critical conversations on directed disruption that makes a difference.